Welcome to our webinar here, Planning in ERP versus APS. I'm joined by Nick Verstraeten, our CTO. I'm Bram de Smet, I'm the CEO of Solventure. And what I think we want to share some insights in our experience in planning in ERP, or should I have an advanced planning system? And then if I have an advanced planning system, should I use the APS from the ERP vendor, or should I go for something different? I think we will try to share some of our insights and experiences based on what we have been doing with companies over the last 20 years. Before we dig into content, we basically want to start by asking you a couple of questions. And we want to do that through Mentimeter. So you'll be able to join us on Mentimeter. And we basically start by asking you a couple of questions like, what is the system you are currently using for your supply chain planning? SAP, ERP, Agility, Blue Yonder, Archiva, M3 ERP, SAP ERP, SAP, and obviously a lot of Excel. The Common Sense system, it's a system, can't imagine what it is, but it's new to me. I see Mendix, which as far as I understand is like an environment which is on top of SAP and where you can do, I would say, custom configuration. SAP APO, I think, which used to be extremely popular 10 to 15 years ago, but which has been discontinued. So we get a lot of questions on what should I now do? Plan in my ERP, move to IBP, move to a best of breed system, SAP and Excel, but probably Excel is the most common planning system in combination with the ERP and in combination with some of the best of breed systems we are seeing here. Follow-up question: what's your biggest struggle when it comes to properly doing your supply chain planning? We don't prescribe, does it need to be systems related? It could be. I had a discussion with a company this afternoon, and for sure they are using APO, and the manual work is really a hurdle in the buy-in from the sales community. IT support, forecast accuracy, lack of pegging, typical requirement of a planning system, breakdown in the supply. So we might come back to that, like how good are ERP systems versus APS systems in translating the impact of a breakdown in the supply to the demand side. Aligning data, I think Nick, come back to data, shelf life support. There may be a lot of standard functionality around, but by how far is shelf life then part of the standard functionality in the ERP tool, in the planning tool that you are currently using? Data visibility, data complexity, data management, integration. So Nick, a lot of data, a lot of integration, a lot of inconsistent master data, wrong master data. So we started with some forecast issues, but we seem to dive into data issues, and I'm sure Nick will come back to that.
It's like and the then, data horror.
Yeah, data horror. And then last question before we dig into the content that we prepared, like what's the question that you would like to get answered in this webinar? We noticed before that ERP versus APS is like a title that triggers people, but why did it trigger you? Why are you attending this webinar? And what are maybe your expectations? Not sure we will be able to answer all of your questions or to get all of the expectations met, but at least it would be interesting to understand what is the question you would like to get answered. Why APS? We will try to explain what we believe is the difference, and I can already say that we believe an APS is needed to manage today's complexity. Clarity on existing tools. I think we will stay generic on what ERP versus APS can do. We have a couple of tools in portfolio, so we're happy to dive into more detail on specific tooling capabilities. Size of business in regards to ERP versus APS. Not sure I understand that. If the question is, do we need to have a certain company size? And does that influence the ERP versus APS decision? I will try to come back to that. Focus on the implementation. Yeah, that's already in the assumption that maybe you will implement an APS. Convince my leadership of the need for an APS. That's a good one. Not necessarily in what we prepared, but let's see if we can come back to that. Pro and cons of one versus the other. I think we will try to highlight that. Advantages of working with an EPS. How is this better than ERP? I think at least we will try to come to some of those. How to increase forecast accuracy. How does the data orchestration module handle real-time data? It's already a detailed question. So let us dive into what we had prepared for you. Yeah, let's start with the basics. And I think what is ERP or enterprise resource planning? I didn't look too far. I took some information from a well-known ERP vendor, as you can see here on the bottom left of the slide. But in general, ERP systems are consisting of a couple of modules. And long story short, you could say that those different modules are supporting different functions of the organization. And the goal of ERP is to have those different functions work together on one integrated data model and one integrated database. And again, I didn't look too far. You can see the reference where I took the information from here on the bottom left. There's a couple of typical modules that are being implemented. If I would say, yeah, where do we typically see that companies would start with implementing ERP or start implementing a new ERP? For sure, the whole finance and accounting module is I would say a favorite starting point. So making sure that we install the general ledger, are able to close the books efficiently, generate financial reports. That for sure is a quite common module. Anything that has to do with sales, as it says here, order to cash process, order management, contracts, billing. Most of the companies we come use an ERP to support this. Out of the sales module, we might be driving a manufacturing model, typically an MRP calculation, potentially production scheduling, manufacturing execution. I just took it from the website of SAP here, but MRP, production scheduling, execution, I think these are typical capabilities of the ERP system. We might come back on how that is different from what an advanced planning system can add on top of that. And instead of going through the full list of that, yeah, I truly believe that ERP at a given point was a revolution from an IT perspective. But you really need to go way back. I think the revolution was probably somewhere between the 60s, maybe to somewhere in the 90s and 60s. Yeah. That's the time of the mainframe computers. And maybe we had a mainframe to help us with the finance and the accounting. In the 70s, it was the era of the distributed computing, which means we had separate servers running separate applications for the finance and accounting, for the sales order processing, for the purchasing. And these systems were not really working in an integrated way. And today it sounds very basic, or we think it's like a given and very logical. But yeah, the whole invention of ERP was to start integrating those disintegrated solutions. And MRP was one of the basis or the basic calculations to start integrating more finance processes and sales order processing and the purchasing and inventory management. And then the MRP2 extended it into an even broader set of modules. And how big the revolution was that ERP, I would say, unchained in those early days. If you ask me, since the ERP revolution, the last 20 years, it has been a lot of ERP evolution. When we started implementing advanced planning systems 15 years ago, we were typically coupling on top of SAP and we were still in R3. And if you look at R3, it had a couple of modules like SD, sales and distribution, MM, materials management, FICO, financial accounting and controlling. A couple of years later, companies migrated to SAP ECC. You see those same modules coming back. Now, a lot of our customers are migrating into S4, but basically, you again see the same modular approach coming back. So if you ask me, there was a lot of revolution, maybe till somewhere in the 90s, but since then, it has been a lot of evolution. And if you ask me, ERP systems today are in essence doing the same as 20 years ago. And I believe the main change has been a change in technology, from older technology stacks into newer technology stacks and now moving into the cloud. That's maybe a very obvious, but I think still necessary introduction of what ERP does. And we will then come to what ERP is not doing. Nick, happy to hand over to you for the APS introduction.
Yeah, very good. Maybe we'll dive into what is supply chain planning. So in order to understand what is an APS system, it's good to understand what is the scope that needs to be covered from a functional perspective. Here we use a reference, and the reference is also at the bottom. I think a good reference book there is Stadler and Kilger that introduces actually their summary or their consolidation of history on supply chain management and that advanced planning domain. So if you have new colleagues joining organizations, it's definitely a good reference book to get really introduced into that domain. And here we see the same that flow of goods coming to the forefront, like the going flow of goods actually indicated with the black arrows, and going from procurement of the raw materials into production in the midsection, production of the intermediates and finished goods into distribution, and then towards the sales movements. And with that flow of goods, there is also that flow of information that needs to happen. And on that vertical axis, you see the time horizon, what needs to be planned more ahead of time on the longer term, what is more on the midterm, and what is then on the shorter term. At the top, of course, it's an integrated perspective of what is kind of the materials program, what is the production system. It's more network questions that are on the table and how to balance the network with where the demand is originating and the supply is located. And that brings it a level down into the midterm, where we see topics coming to the forefront like master production, scheduling, capacity planning, distribution planning, and midterm sales planning. And then shorter term, we get into the interrelation between the operational execution and planning. For example, on short-term sales planning, warehouse replenishment, transport planning. That's a lot of much more logistics type of planning activities that happen typically on a much shorter horizon. So that's supply chain planning. And on the next slide, we'll discuss about, okay, how does typically different APS modules map to these functional questions that need to be addressed. So when we look at typical APS planning modules, that longer term is here designated as strategic network planning. You will find supply and demand balancing, let's say on the network level. On that longer term, also can sometimes be called as an SNOP evaluation. On the midterm, we get into master planning. The more you get to the midterm, the more detailed your plans will typically be. Master planning, you have an end-to-end model from procurement until distribution. In a lot of industries on a weekly level of weekly time bucket granularity, also focused on first questions like production frequency, the production wheel, and how to optimize these type of trade-offs before you get to more detailed planning into production planning, distribution planning, and the material requirements planning or MRP of raw materials on the left-hand side. So that are typically the typical modules you will find back. How do we look at, I know first maybe on the horizons, and again on the vertical axis, we had the longer term, midterm, and shorter term horizon. Here, how should you link that or think in those horizons? It's also linked to this picture around when do you take which type of commitments in your supply chain. It starts at the right. I would start at the right of the picture. In a certain moment, you're free to make any type of evaluations because there is little or no commitment to any stakeholders in that end-to-end supply chain. But as soon as your time progresses and you come closer to the actual occurrence of demand, you will need to start to take some commitments. Even you need to start to take commitments ahead of time that your customer is taking commitments. So you are taking a commitment, for example, to a supplier in order to order raw materials or some packaging materials, for example. So that's already a commitment you take possibly ahead of time of when the customer places that commitment. Then you have a commitment to production, for example, when you convert the plant order into a firm plant order or a effective production order. That's that decision. And then there is even a decision that you take on distribution of finished goods from your central DC or plant towards local warehouses. That's even on a different horizon. So depending upon your industry, you will see that those time horizons are fluctuating, and that the level of that your horizons deviate, and that you also need to align those horizons with the type of industry and those type of commitments you take in your supply chain. So, for example, certain industries like semiconductor is very different as, for example, food and beverage. Their commitments are taken much more in advance. It is a very extreme example, but it's good as a to set the mind, let's say, in that domain. And you see here the typical names coming forward. And what is the frozen horizon on the short term, what's flexible, and then what is free. And that also aligns with the different modules that we also will touch upon later on: rough cut capacity planning and the free horizon, master planning and that flexible, and production scheduling rather to optimize in that frozen horizon. How do we look at supply chain planning or that field? Again, we see here it's actually an evolution of the house of planning. Let's say at the bottom part, you see the ERP and the execution layer coming to the forefront. So actually there on execution, it's very transaction oriented. An ERP system is in my belief, the perfect system to actually create a super structured way of working to execute transactions, to register and execute transactions. So that's that execution layer. It also connects with the TMS for transportation management. It connects with warehouse management systems for the warehousing operations. It connects with the MES for manufacturing execution. It might connect with a supplier relationship management system for execution of purchasing activities. That's the foundation. And actually the planning lives on top of that foundation of ERP. Then we are in that green zone of advanced planning systems, where again, from the right towards the left, we go from sales into deliver, make, and source alongside score. And we go from demand planning into inventory optimization, where we will define how much inventory to hold, what is the minimum safety stock requirement, and what is our average stock, what are stocks that are at risk typically are part of that inventory optimization area. And then more to the left, we get into the different variants of supply planning. So you see similar blocks coming to the forefront, DRP, RCCP, and that S&OP manager at the top, in order to really be able to make different variants of supply and demand scenarios and make an evaluation between different scenarios and drive that executive S&OP process forward. What is the APS revolution? Let's say when we hear advanced, it's also in the word APS, advanced planning system. At what makes and what made those systems advanced when there was the search, let's say, of that term APS, is that in comparison with MRP, that it captured more sophistication or a higher level of sophistication. So it would include in these APS systems by default more an algorithmic perspective. And what can be that algorithmic perspective? Well, it's actually one of the basic constraints that is not covered in MRP is the capacity limitation. So I think it's a severe limitation to make or assumption to make that we can assume an unconstrained capacity. So therefore, a lot of functionality in supply planning modules of APS systems is organized around, okay, how can we introduce the capacity limitation and then actually make sure that the production plan that we create is capacity feasible. It's not only capacity feasible, but also other constraints are taken into account. What are raw material constraints? What are constraints with regards to auxiliary resources? Auxiliary resources might be molds, for example, in certain industries. Molds need to be available in order to launch production, and there is a limited amount of molds available. Raw material might be, for example, linked to contracts, but also linked to pipelines that can only give a certain amount of throughput or volume. And something that is also linked to more making an efficient way of production is the production wheel, the production frequency. I had a call earlier today with a client where the discussion was around, okay, today we just produce with standard 6 weeks availability in inventory, but we don't actually make a deliberate choice in how often do we want to produce which part of the portfolio. And therefore, the efficiency in production is actually not really well at a good level or properly dealt with. So that's definitely a part where there is some algorithmic capabilities which are not in a standard ERP system. When it is about the demand side, then there are forecasting algorithms. You have extrapolation methods, regression methods, also best fit methods, which are automatic model selection capabilities. Again, that is not in a standard ERP system. And on the inventory algorithms, you have safety stock calculations, also multi-echelon safety stock calculations, which take a more holistic perspective. Well, these calculations are not part of an ERP system. They are taken as an input. And there is a field in ERP systems to take that as an input, but it's not, it's up to the customer how to populate it, let's say. So that's something that are basic capabilities of advanced planning systems, and which make that it is a necessity in order to also have a good execution of that ERP system. And that comes from the race, let's say, of operations research, which has gotten traction in the 80s. And then there are initial companies to the market like i2, Managistics, that actually have tackled that in the industry, and which were the first versions of best of breed APS systems. When we talk about the evolution, the latest years, and we take an example of one of the solutions we have in portfolio, well, this is an example of the Archiva solution that we have in portfolio. When we go back more than 20 years, there was a Zameter product that even had a different name. Also, the company was called Supply Chain Consultants at that time. And it was developed in a certain technological framework, which was Visual Basic, before it then was migrated into a different technology set, which is .NET, and also moving from Visual Basic towards .NET is a natural evolution. It goes hand in hand with technological advancements that are being made by industry leaders for technology like Microsoft, which actually are supporting these underlying technologies. And from Zameter, you got much more standalone modules, whereas in the Archiva realm in .NET, there was much more integration already between demand, supply, inventory, and S&OP, with more capabilities in order to do collaboration, for example. And now we are already a couple of years in together with Archiva into a transition towards a SaaS technology, with all the benefits of that SaaS technology, which is a different user experience mainly. So a different user experience for the end user and a different way of managing the underlying infrastructure for the IT departments. And the underlying IT infrastructure is no longer managed by the IT department of the customers, but then being managed by the vendor, so that it's a different service offering towards towards clients. So that's actually the evolution, and that's much more, again, like in the ERP context, more a technological evolution that is being made.
Yeah, and neither I'd say that nor ERP vendors nor APS vendors will be very happy if we say that in essence the systems are doing the same as 20 years ago. It also doesn't mean that they don't provide a lot of value. But if I challenge a bit, for me, there's a lack of innovation, I think, in both areas. And a lot of investment has been done, but it has more been in migrating the logic to new technology stacks rather than the paradigm has been changing. And in different webinars, we have been talking about a different approach to S&OP, like an S&OP 2.0, and enabling different planning models. I think there is an opportunity also for APS systems to better embrace that. Let's then come to the question, do I need an APS system? We believe the answer is yes. With today's complexities, with today's volatilities, with today's constraints that can come a bit from everywhere, with the volatility in prices and now import tariffs, like having a decent planning system is needed, and a decent planning system for us means an advanced planning system. There's still the question like, do I need a best of breed system, or can I use the APS from SAP, which today would be IBP? The bigger ERP systems like Oracle also have their own APS suite, so I will come to that question later on. But let's start with the first question. So, can I plan my supply chain by just using the basic ERP functionality? The answer is no. I no longer believe in that. I don't think it's going to work. And why is that? We have already for many years our vision on S&OP and how to drive successful S&OP. And what is here on that inner circle, and again, we have a vision paper on that. If you want to know more, it's available for download from the website, or you can connect with us and we're happy to share it. But driving successful S&OP has a couple of requirements from a tooling perspective. So in the executive S&OP, you want to make value-based decisions, but you plan volume. So you need an easy volume to value conversion. In an S&OP, you want to make decisions on an aggregated level, but you plan the details. So you need easy aggregation, disaggregation. And in the current uncertain world, you want to make decisions based on scenarios. And so instead of killing by PowerPoint and having 50 S&OP slides, you want to make decisions. If you want to make decisions, you want to see different scenarios and what would be the impact of different types of decisions and different types of scenarios. And you cannot do that based on an ERP, and you cannot do that based on Excels on top of an ERP. It's simply not going to work. So you do need an APS to drive a proper S&OP and a proper supply chain planning. Other reasons you need an APS is to account for real life complexity. So as soon as you have a production wheel, it's not going to work with a standard out of the box MRP calculation. Capacity constraints. So a basic MRP calculation is capacity unconstrained. So what I have seen companies trying is like, we have a capacity unconstrained MRP calculation, and then we ask the scheduler to come up with a feasible schedule. That's simply too hard. If you have only 5 products, that's maybe still manageable, but most companies don't have 5 products, but maybe 500 or 5,000 or 50,000. Also, MRP systems are typically good to start from the demand and calculate what are the requirements. But if all of a sudden a supplier is not delivering the raw materials or not the right quality of raw materials, how does that impact my demand? At a traditional ERP or MRP cannot easily calculate back from the raw material constraint into a demand constraint or into scenario. So do you need an APS? I believe yes. One of the questions was, how do I convince management? We cannot go into detail here, but we start from the triangle. I had a discussion with the company earlier today. The company wants to improve their S&OP and wants to move from SAP APO into new tooling. How do you get buy-in from the executive management? It's identifying, okay, what are the issues we have here in our supply chain triangle? Because better planning should help us to better tackle those issues. That's how to do it. Should I use a best of breed system? We have a couple of portfolio, or can I go for SAP IBP or for the planning suite of Oracle? Well, this is some research by Laura Ceciri. And if you review it, like what's the time to implement? 12 months or less. 71% of the respondents for a best of breed, only 37 for what she calls ERP expansionist. So those are the ERP variants of the APS. Am I early or on time? 56% versus 37%. Am I under or on budget? 59% versus 40%. The ROI or payback, 9 months or less, 34% versus only 11%. Satisfied, 81% versus 63%. I know Laura Cecilia is not known for being a big fan of the ERP vendors, but it's independent research, and she literally says, like, why would companies implement solutions that cost more, take longer to deploy, and have lower user satisfaction? So if you follow this research, you should go for a best of breed system. And what I've seen happening over the last 10 years is that if you look at SAP or Oracle, they don't make their money on the APS systems. SAP, Oracle, they make their money on the ERP base and on the ERP modules, which also means that if they go through a rough period, then they need to cut costs. They're not going to cut costs in the ERP teams. No, they're going to cut costs in the APS teams. So I also believe that, a best of breed vendor, again, we have a couple of portfolio, their primary focus is building APS systems. So they don't even need to make the trade-off, like what is most important to us. For them, it's obvious. Building excellent planning systems is what their primary reason of existence is. So that's basically what they do. Which brings us to the Solventure offering. Nick, not sure if we agreed you were going to introduce that.
Yeah, indeed. How do we actually support clients? What is to bring that planning mastery, that planning know-how into their organizations? Well, we have decided to go with a portfolio of planning solutions. And the portfolio of planning solutions, when we zoom in on the supply chain planning solutions, we have chosen to work with a number of best-of-breed APS systems. We work with Archiva, which is a American vendor based at the East Coast, Wilmington, Delaware. We have there a long-standing relationship for more than 15 years. But also we work together with Kinaxis, a Canadian organization, where we have more than 5 years, I think, or close to 5 years, a collaboration with, and we are also collaborating with OMP, OM Partners, a Belgian organization based out of Wommelgem. So that are the 3 APS systems that we have in portfolio and where we have capabilities around within our organization to support clients in these technologies. When we go into more the detailed scheduling horizon, the shorter horizon, then Archiva, Kinaxis, OMP have a number of capabilities. But there is some difference between the type of industries and the type of scheduling problems that arise. And one company that we specifically partner with for some scheduling problems is more optimal, and more optimal is based out of the Netherlands. It's a rather recent or a young organization with a number of people that have a background from Quintic, and Quintic that was a strong player in the APS field, and that then was acquired by the Dassault Group. So a number of Quintic stakeholders are now in that more optimal organization with their in-depth experience on that scheduling domain, which also allows to address a number of unique needs in really the shorter term scheduling problems. Our own investments and our own intellectual property that we have consolidated is collected on what is called a Solventure Perform platform. It's a SaaS solution with a number of modules. What are the modules of Solventure Perform is on the one hand, a data orchestrator. The data orchestrator originally started back in 2017 as a means to move data from A to B, as some people would say, between the ERP and the planning system. Because of that need that we have seen in the Mentimeter questionnaire, the need for good integration of qualitative data, we had observed that need, and we actually wanted to make sure that the learnings that we captured from one integration solution, that we captured into the next integrations that we would set up. It's a templatized ERP to planning integration toolset, which means that we have templates for all large ERP systems, going from SAP, ECC, S/4HANA, but also Oracle. Also, for example, for Infor, we do have experiences, and Microsoft Dynamics 365 FO. We also have a number of strong capabilities and references there. On data quality, that's an evolution of the last years, is that we have seen that companies also need support in doing an initial data quality assessment early on in their implementation project, not when they go live, but when the project starts, that we start with the data quality assessment. We make a measurable quantitative score of how good or bad your data is, specifically for supply chain planning or for the making use of that APS system. And then we translate it into a data quality monitoring. A third aspect on the data orchestrator is the challenge of harmonization of data, and that specifically deals with the scattered IT landscape a lot of the organizations have. It's sometimes let's call it a wet dream of a lot of IT managers and CIOs to have one single ERP instance, but the reality is that a lot of companies deal with multiple ERP instances, which are there due to, for example, acquisitions that are being made. But for APS goals, we need to consolidate that into a consolidated data model, into one data model, because it's one supply chain that we want to manage. So that's what is being dealt with on that data harmonization. With, for example, an example there is stock transfer orders that are being modeled in these different ERP instances as a purchase, as a sale, while for supply chain planning that there needs to be a mapping that is actually an internal stock transfer order and not a real sale. So these type of things, they seem obvious, but that is sometimes a nightmare from a data perspective. The two other modules on Solventure Perform deal with portfolio optimization, where we actually challenge the status quo of a number of manufacturing companies. Do not plan just what is being asked for, and it's not because it's forecasted that therefore it's sustainable to be produced and to be sold from the organization. Also, products that do not perform well, that are not sustainable in the portfolio, need to be challenged and need to be evaluated if those are to be retained in the portfolio. And at the same time, there needs to be focus on those needle movers that actually drive the real value of the organization and impact the results. With the last module, Corporate Performance Monitor, we actually make sure that we can deliver on business cases. So what we do there is we create a baseline measurement ahead of an APS implementation. We do a baseline measurement, and then upon closing of the APS implementation, we follow up and throughout the implementation as well. But at the closing, we are able to follow up the key performance indicators, the KPIs that are linked to the business case of the APS implementation. So, of course, working capital efficiency, profitability, and revenue growth are center stage there, but they're also being translated to more operational KPIs. So that's our approach, that's our offering in order to ensure that we can support clients with an end-to-end transformation approach.
Yep. And so as just to follow up on what is being said there, like even if you say, well, I would say we have a lot of knowledge on what it really takes to implement an advanced planning system and how to come to decent planning, but we can really start from the beginning. So if your question is, how do I get buy-in from the executive team, or how do I make a business case, or can you help us like build a proof of concept? Can you help us to train the people so we can also help you with the preliminary steps to that? And that gradually brings us to the end of the webinar. So we will open up for questions, and I'll show the Mentimeter questions in a minute. But I would say in this subject, there's a lot of typical questions and typical pitfalls. I would say I'm just showing a couple of them here, but instead of answering these questions, let us open up to questions from the group for the people that can stay on, and feel free to type your questions over here. And in the meantime, I'll answer the question which was in the question box from GoToMeeting here. So you talked about the lack of innovation. How about concurrent planning to support scenario analysis? Would you consider that innovation? And I assume that concurrent planning, let's put it like that, concurrent planning to me resonates as what Kinexus is doing as a platform, and concurrent means I have a change in a supplier delivery, which is coming in late, and I can basically automatically see which manufacturing orders and sales orders are going to be impacted, and I get instant recommendations on what can be done to solve that. And you've seen that we partner with Kinexus and had the privilege to talk to one of the founders of Kinexus, and that idea of concurrent planning was already there in the 80s, basically when Kinexus was founded. And I would say at that time, there were two competing models. It was like more the solver-based approach, where you first had to run the solver, and then the output of the solver was giving you a solution. And you had the concurrent planning model, which was, no, we will try to build like an in-memory model that connects all data to all data, and which gives you instant feedback. So in that sense, concurrent planning is not a new innovation. It has also been around since the 80s. And what I do see is that also the tools which were more coming from the LP background or the optimization background, they have also built in memory models, which at least if you change something in the tool, you can automatically see the impact. So I understand where the question is coming from, but I don't necessarily see that as a recent innovation. Take another question from the Q&A box here. What is the time spent in an APS implementation? I would say anywhere between 6 months and 3 years. It really depends on the complexity of the organization, the scope of the project. We're happy to follow up with you on that. And let me switch to the Menti questions here. How do you decide which APS system is best fit for the business? Yeah, I can tell you how not to do it. So don't do a formal RFP process, because what you will end up with is a long list of functionalities, and most tools will be able to cover most of the functionalities you need. So our recommendation for sure would be to do a proof of concept and do a pilot. It will not only reveal what the tool can do, it will also reveal what the implementation partner can do, and it will also reveal to you what type of data you need to feed those advanced planning systems, and how big the challenge on your side is to get your data ready to support an implementation. Nick, feel free to pick one from your side. Otherwise, I just keep answering.
So let me pick on the ROI. I think an important lesson learned is that you need to be set up in your implementation well for measuring the ROI.
Have some connection issues here.
Yeah. So, and for that ROI, you should actually measure your baseline at the start and actually also create some space within the implementation team to create sufficient focus on monitoring those KPIs along the trajectory of the implementation. Because the real implementation actually kind of drags all the attention to technical aspects and to go live and to adoption of the solution, whereas you actually need to ensure that your business case is also being realized. So there, I would advise companies to, when they set themselves up for an APS implementation, to make sure that you can actually create focus with separate resources, not the same people, but with separate resources, which actually follow up the key KPIs of your business case, so that you can actually also follow up on the initial ROI that you have defined to do that. And the ROI for defining the business case upfront, again, we have standard material based upon the previous experiences that we have, and what are the typical KPIs on which you can set a certain ambition to improve that depending upon where you are today. So thanks all of you for joining in today's webinar on APS versus ERP. I hope it gave you a good quick reminder of what are the basics and some thought provokers on how to tackle those APS versus ERP questions within your organizations, and to convince, for example, upper and higher management of an APS implementation, because just doing it in Excel, like we have seen in the Menti, is insufficient. It lacks integration and up-to-date data. It's no longer valid for this era, and doing it in the ERP is, in our opinion, also not the way to go. So I think you should evaluate, like, okay, what is our direction in doing it in a type of best-of-breed solution. Thanks all of you, and I'll close the webinar here. See you next time.